Remember Pokemon Sword and Shield? Yeah, that game frickin' sucks. Why can't Pokemon be like the good old days when you could actually catch them all and when Pikachu was morbidly obese? Well, if you're a disillusioned Pokemon fanatic like me, there's a new game to reinvigorate your love for enslaving wild animals to fight each other for human entertainment. With 6 different islands to discover and 8 different dojos to fight, you can throw your Nintendo DS in the garbage and tell Reggie to take a hike. Because Pokemon is cancelled. When a game like Temtem, so similar in concept to the Pokemon series, comes out, there's always going to be talk of it being a potential Pokemon killer. But going up against the highest grossing media franchise in history is not an easy task. And Temtem is a Pokemon killer in the sense that Starbound is a well-made video game. In that it isn't really. I enjoyed playing this game. What I got to play of it anyway. It's a fun RPG that follows a similar formula to Pokemon, which over the years has been tried and tested, though you might argue that it follows it a little too closely. While it's good to see a Pokemon alternative making its way onto the market, and the game does throw in a few neat new features and provides an actual challenge for more seasoned players, Temtem struggles to have a truly unique identity, and might just catch itself in the headlights of becoming an early access fiasco. Temtem starts you off by throwing you into a pretty familiar concept. Start in little town, go see Professor, get your starter Pokemon, Temtem, and then fight your rival. Only in this game they kick your ass. The actual battle system is good. The main introduction is its stamina mechanic, which means that each move will use a certain amount of stamina, and if your Temtem runs out, they'll overexert themselves, take damage, and will not be able to move the next turn. It's very attritional. This shit is like Pokemon World War I. You'll not often get through the major fights without losing any of your Temtem. On top of that, the game doesn't let you use psychic powers to deduce what Temtem your opponent will send out next, so you can just swap yours over to outmatch it. It adds another level of strategy to the game and prevents you from just keeping one Temtem out in front constantly blasting its big attacks to wipe the team. All moves also have different priorities, meaning that you won't always just go first if you're the fastest. Some moves will even gain priority or power when being combined with other moves or other Temtem. Another big focus of the battling is team composition and how your Temtem complement each other. All battles are double battles, meaning you'll want Temtem that can fight well together when they're out in front. What I really liked about this game was that levels didn't completely dictate exactly how a battle played out. Yes, they helped, but solid composition and smart rotation allowed you to take on teams that out-leveled you. It also meant that you couldn't just send out your most beefed up Temtem and expect them to breeze through lower level opposition. My only major gripe with the battle system is that the stamina mechanic does lose its impact further into the game. Early on I had to be a lot more careful about my move order, but as your Temtem get more stamina in reserve, it becomes much less of a restraint and loses much of its strategic edge. I found the game overall to be a hell of a lot more difficult than Sword and Shield. You remember how in those games you'd do one fight that you'd probably win without taking any damage and then the game would just heal all of your Pokemon anyway? Well, in Temtem you'll have to beat the Lieutenant just before fighting the boss, which will probably take out a good chunk of your party, and then have to fight the boss straight away without any chance to heal or reshuffle. Because fuck you. On top of that, your friend slash rival is a total dickwad, but actually competent at battling too. They beat the shit out of me a few times, which is basically scripted when you fight them at the start, and that only made me hate them even more. The game was very clearly aimed at more seasoned Pokemon fans, the kind that are still relying on their nostalgia in order to fake enough enthusiasm to spend $60 every time Game Freak spews out another title. Where the cracks start to appear on Temtem is in its side quests. They're simply obnoxious and feel like they were thrown on top in order to artificially pad out the length of the game, especially when you consider how much actual content is currently playable. All side quests are fetch quests or constant backtracks between 2 different locations that force you to go out of your way for little to no reward. You'll go back and forth between 2 assholes halfway across the map and get a fucking apple for your troubles. Due to the game being early access, you'll eventually run into a brick wall in the story and won't be able to go any further. Plenty of areas in the game are marked as work in progress as well, but I guess this is what you need to expect by buying into a game before it's fully released. It's cool that Temtem is an MMO, as that's something that's always been sort of thrown into the ring for Pokemon to evolve into, pun completely intended. However, the way it's been implemented feels like it was just kinda thrown in on top as a neat buzzword for the game's description. I had no genuine interaction with any other players in this game, partially because the only friend I had who bought the game refunded it shortly after. I can't help but feel like online interaction could have been a little more integrated into the gameplay, because all the game being an MMO did for me was getting to watch other people also barge through NPC houses uninvited. Overall, the game appears to be pretty well polished. I didn't come across any Bethesda-esque bugs or any missing refinement that really detracted from my enjoyment of the game. The only thing that really bugged me was the UI. For some reason, you're not able to see all of the side quests you're currently in the middle of, only the two most recent ones, and you can also only see the map you're currently on rather than being able to flick through all of them. A few UI quality of life improvements would go a long way. Visually, the game is nice enough. It's got a neat looking, if not simple, art style that complements the sort of game that it is. The Temtem designs were kinda cool and consistently styled, though the character models looked rather eerily like Xbox Live avatars. One thing I will say for the game is that its pacing is not totally destroyed by constant lines of mediocre dialogue. I'm not saying that the dialogue is much more than mediocre, especially all of the lazily slapped in references it spews, but at least it doesn't make up a third of the playtime like it did in Sword and Shield. It is a lot darker though. Like, a little morbid at times. There's a guy who straight up threatens to melt your body in acid and loot the remains. What the fuck, Temtem? What Temtem really lacks is a unique identity. Yeah, it's clearly inspired by Pokemon, and that's being polite and not just calling it a ripoff, but while it has a few unique qualities, a vast majority of the game's ideas are simply borrowed and rebranded. Choose one of 3 starter Temtem, find wild Temtem in the tall grass, battle other Tamers when you walk in their eye line, fight all 8 of the dojo leaders, fight the evil bad guy team too. You can paint it however you'd like, but it's Pokemon's formula. Even core game mechanics and features, SVs and TVs just being EVs and IVs, stab moves, courses just being TMs, much of the more technical side of the game is more or less identical to Pokemon, but with a different naming scheme. Don't get me wrong, it's not totally identical. As I said, I thought the game threw in some neat new battle mechanics, but I still can't help but feel like this is almost a Pokemon fan game rather than a totally new IP. The amount of times I accidentally wrote Pokemon instead of Temtem while writing this review was more than I'd like to admit. I'm glad that there's some competition on the market for Pokemon because it's a stagnating franchise and competition is exactly what it needs, but I really hope Temtem would be more original than it was. Temtem is a fun game. Although it's not finished yet, before it comes to an abrupt halt, it's enjoyable. If you're a more seasoned Pokemon fan that's a little disappointed with the way that the franchise is going or are up for more of a challenge than Sword and Shield could ever hope to throw at you, then Temtem is a great alternative. It was much more cutthroat and actually made me think strategically, which is something a turn-based RPG should aim to do. What I did get to play I enjoyed quite a lot, but I can't help but feel that the release should have been held off until the main storyline was finished at least. It was a real vibe killer to just run into a brick wall of not being able to go any further, and I feel like it saps some enthusiasm from coming back to the game once or if it has been fully released. I feel like we're getting to a whole new area of acceptability with early access games, where now it doesn't even need to be a complete storyline for it to be released and sold. Sure, most early access games are unfinished, but they're not usually story driven, and won't have that moment where they just abruptly stop in your face. And that should certainly not excuse it from criticism. If a developer wants to release their game in early access at a decently hefty price nonetheless, it should not be spared of criticism simply because it might be better in the future. Creamer need to be very careful with the remainder of the development of this game. While it's a neat idea in theory to get the audience involved with its development as much as possible, they'll do well to make sure the game isn't forever remembered as that Pokemon rip-off cash grab that was never really finished. At least it's providing a new experience and a genuinely challenging alternative to our favourite animal cruelty simulator, But Temtem still has a lot to prove before it could even be considered close to a Pokemon killer. Like adding Whoopers for shit's sake. You stole everything else from Pokemon, you might as well have stolen them too.